In August 1485, King Richard of England rode out from Leicester to face Henry Tudor at Bosworth. Defeated and killed, his body was brought back to the city slung over a pack horse, where it was displayed as a sign to his supporters that all was lost.
Richard III has spent centuries caught between history and legend, remembered as the defeated king with the curved back who vanished after the Battle of Bosworth. He died in 1485, was displayed in Leicester, and was buried with little ceremony at the Grey Friars church. Then the friary disappeared, the grave was forgotten, and stories claimed his bones had been thrown into a river. More than 500 years later, archaeologists opened a trench beneath an ordinary parking lot and uncovered a skeleton with a sharply curved spine and brutal battle wounds. The bones looked promising, but resemblance alone could not identify a lost monarch. That required medieval records, living relatives, advanced forensic work, and a DNA preserved inside centuries-old teeth. Before we begin, tell us in the comments whether you would have believed a missing English king could still be found beneath painted parking spaces. This is how DNA finally solved the mystery of Richard III's lost body. The king who disappeared. Final day came on August 22, 1485, during the Battle of Bosworth. The Yorkist king launched a desperate mounted attack towards Henry Tudor, hoping to end the struggle by killing his rival. Richard was surrounded and slain, becoming the last English king to die in battle. His defeat ended Plantagenet rule and opened the Tudor era. His body was stripped, carried to Leicester, and publicly displayed so there could be no doubt that the king was dead. It was then taken to the church of Grey Friars and buried in the choir. There was no grand royal funeral, and the grave appears to have been dug hurriedly. The Grey Friars community survived for several more decades. In 1538, Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries brought the friary to an end. Its church was demolished, the land changed hands, and later construction gradually erased the medieval layout. A story eventually spread that Richard's remains had been dug up and thrown into the River Soar. The tale was colorful, easy to repeat, and difficult to prove. By the modern era, his burial place had become one of England's most famous historical mysteries. Beneath the parking lot.
After the Battle of Bosworth, Richard's body was stripped and slung on a horse and brought here to Leicester, where it was put on public display. It was then buried at Greyfriars Church, and it's known the ruins of that church are under this car park.
The search began with the belief that Richard might never have left Greyfriars. Philippa Langley of the Richard III Society pushed for an archaeological investigation, while researchers used old maps to estimate where the friary once stood beneath modern Leicester. The suspected area contained offices, streets, utility lines, a school playground, and several parking spaces. Archaeologists planned a series of trenches, knowing that locating the church would already be a major success. Finding one particular grave seemed highly unlikely. The first trench was placed across the parking area to test the predicted route of the church walls, not because anyone knew a royal burial lay directly below. The excavation began in August 2012, almost exactly 527 years after Richard's death. Within hours, the first trench exposed human leg bones. Archaeologist Matthew Morris carefully followed them into a grave beneath what proved to be the choir of the lost church. The skeleton was almost complete. Victorian construction had passed dangerously close, removing the feet and part of one leg, yet the rest of the body survived. Its spine curved strongly to one side, and the skull showed obvious wounds. The team labeled it Skeleton 1, but everyone understood what the evidence might mean. Clues in the bones.
The skeleton from Greyfriars has a number of interesting characteristics that we've been able to learn a lot more about during the process of analysis. A lot of the injuries were concentrated on the skull. In particular, there were several glancing blows really from a sharp implement that had taken small quantities of bone off the surface of the skull. We also identified a penetrating wound on top of the skull. This was caused by something that had been brought down on top of the head with enough force that it had actually dislodged two flaps of bone on the bone interior.
Osteologists determined that Skeleton 1 was male, probably between 30 and 34 years old. Richard had been 32 when he died. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains in the correct period, while chemical analysis suggested a rich diet associated with high status. The spine showed severe scoliosis. This would have raised one shoulder and made the torso appear uneven. but it did not create the monstrous hunchback later presented on stage. Without the curvature, the man may have stood around 5 feet 8 inches tall. The skeleton carried at least 11 injuries from around the time of death. Several blows struck the skull, including 2 deep wounds at its base that could have been fatal. Other cuts suggested his helmet had been removed before the final attacks. Injuries to the ribs and pelvis may have been inflicted after death as acts of humiliation. The body had been buried without a coffin, and the grave was too short, forcing it into an awkward position. These details matched the treatment expected for a defeated king whose enemies wanted him forgotten. Still, none of this could provide absolute proof. Many men died violently in the late 15th century. The age, location, spinal condition, and battle wounds created an extraordinary case, but DNA was needed to move the identification beyond informed belief. Tracing a living relative.
And it's an all-female line, as you'd expect, down through the generations until you get to the both of them. I was able to take DNA samples from them and look at their mitochondrial DNA. First and foremost, they matched each other, which meant that the family tree linking them was correct. And then they matched the skeletal remains, which again showed that the DNA evidence as well was pointing to these being the remains of Richard III.
Richard left no known living descendants, so researchers had to work through the family tree of his siblings. Genealogists focused on a line passed through women because mitochondrial DNA is inherited from the mother. Richard and his sister, Anne of York, received the same mitochondrial DNA from their mother, Cecily Neville, and then passed it on to her children. If an unbroken female line could be traced to a living person, that person's DNA could be compared with the skeleton. Historian John Ashdown Hill had already traced one branch to Joy Ibsen, a Canadian-born woman who died in 2008. Her son, Michael Ibsen, provided a sample. Researchers later identified another relative, Wendy Duldig, through a separate female line. Ancient DNA specialists removed teeth from skeleton 1 because teeth can protect genetic material from contamination and decay. Protective clothing, sterilized equipment, and separate laboratories reduced the risk that modern DNA would confuse the results. The work was repeated under tightly controlled conditions. The mitochondrial sequence from the skeleton matched Michael Ibsen and closely matched Wendy Duldig. That result was powerful because the genealogy and the biology supported each other. The researchers were not comparing the bones with a random volunteer. They were testing people connected through carefully reconstructed maternal lines reaching back more than 5 centuries. The identification.
Ladies and gentlemen, beyond reasonable doubt, the individual exhumed at Greyfriars in September 2012 is indeed Richard III, the last Plantagenet King of England.
The investigation produced one unexpected complication. The skeleton's Y chromosome did not match living men believed to descend through Richard's wider paternal family. This meant that somewhere across many generations, a recorded father was not the biological father. That did not cancel the mitochondrial result. The paternal comparison covered a very long chain, leaving many opportunities for a break. More importantly, every other major clue still pointed in the same direction. The grave stood in the choir of Grey Friars, exactly where Richard was said to have been buried. The man was the correct age, lived during the correct period, ate like a member of the elite, had severe scoliosis, and died from battlefield injuries. Researchers combined the genetic and archaeological evidence in a statistical analysis. Their conclusion was overwhelming. The remains were millions of times more likely to belong to Richard III than to an unrelated man with similar characteristics. On February 4, 2013, the University of Leicester announced that skeleton 1 was Richard III. Further DNA analysis suggested he probably had blue eyes and blonde hair as a child. Scientists and artists also used the skull to create a facial reconstruction, giving the public a more human image than the familiar theatrical villain. In March 2015, his remains were reburied at Leicester Cathedral inside an oak coffin made by Michael Ibsen, one of the relatives who helped prove his identity. Now it's time to hear from you. Which part of the discovery amazes you the most? Finding the skeleton in the first trench, reading the battle wounds, or tracing living relatives across more than 5 centuries? Let us know in the comment section below.